Who's here? Raise your hand if you went to our 2 Common Core math meetings. So we got, look, okay, so almost the majority of the group. So this is gonna mirror that. So those were 2 Fridays that were dedicated to mathematics and the new Common Core standards. Today and next Friday, part 1 and part 2 of English language arts. So these are the new standards that we've been rolling out really for the last couple of years, but this is really the first official year that our classes have converted to those new standards. Mr. Carrillo is our assistant principal, and he's an instructional specialist assistant principal. What that means is he's overseeing English language arts on our campus. He's handling all the professional development for the teachers. He goes into the classrooms to observe lessons. He helps plan with the teachers also. Teachers that have given presentations at night for the Common Core language arts, he works with those teachers also on the content of those presentations. He's only here part-time, but he's making a full-time impact on our classrooms. That's not an understatement at all, and we're so fortunate to have him with us. And so you've got him today and next Friday. And initially, he set up the speaker that was supposed to be here today. That speaker has taken a new position with the district and has left. And so we were in a pickle. Okay, we lost our speaker for the 2 ELA meetings, and Eddie's not even at our school on Fridays. He's supposed to be at another school. He worked at his schedule around so that he could be here, he could give you the presentation, and we're so grateful to have him. This is Eddie Carrillo.
It is a pleasure. I enjoy talking to teachers. I enjoy, also, one of my favorite parts is presenting to parents. I've done that many times as a coordinator where we would present. So also, there's a lot going on with Common Core, right? There's so much going on, and I know with our teachers, they're still trying to figure it out. And other schools are still trying to figure it out. And so can you imagine if teachers are still trying to figure out what are the parents thinking, right? With Common Core, what is Common Core? I think you have an idea of what it is, right? But that's what we're going to talk about. What is Common Core? We're going to talk about the instructional shifts, right? What are these shifts? And then kind of give you a teacher's perspective. What are teachers using? What are they using to plan lessons for your children? Because it's changing, ladies and gentlemen. It is changing. It's not like in the years past where we would plan something and hopefully hit a standard. It's really looking at the standards, keeping the standards in mind. It's planning with the end in mind. So when you hear that, it's really thinking about the standards. So today you're going to get a perspective of the teacher's perspective of what they use to plan lessons. Okay. So our learning targets for today would be: what are the Common Core state standards? What are the key instructional shifts for ELA? Okay, we'll talk about those. And then we're going to get into web depth of knowledge, and that's a tool that teachers use to plan lessons for your children. So we're going to get into that. And again, this is informational. Everything that I'm going to talk about here, you have it in your packet, so don't feel overwhelmed. Well, what is that? It's in your packets, and it's organized in the same fashion that I have this PowerPoint. So the first question is, what do you know about the Common Core state standards? I know you hear about Common Core on TV. You probably heard it from your teachers. But just take a moment to think about what do you know, and then share with an elbow partner. I'll give you about 30 seconds. Just kind of share what you know about Common Core. Go ahead. Give you 30 seconds. Anything that you remember or know about Common Core. Quiet hand. Who can share what's one thing that you know about Common Core, or two? Some things that you've been hearing around. What is it? What is it?
I think just like going into depth, whether it's English or math, learning how to like assess math problems or English, different ways to have an answer.
Perfect. That's exactly.
Can you repeat every question, just so we have it?
Yeah, so what do they know about Common Core? So that's one of the questions. That's a little bit of what you know about Common Core. Certainly depth, going into depth into math. English language arts. So it's, when you think of standards, when you look at last year's standards in years past, there were a lot. So now it's less standards, but they are dense. They are dense. They really delve into looking into every lesson. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Explain.
Pardon?
It's basically to explain, to show how you got the answer and what, they want to make sure they know, I guess, so you have to go kids need to show their work, like how they get it.
Beautiful. They justify their answers, they explain their answers. So not only are they just solving a problem in math, for example, but now they have to justify it. And that's what they have to do in the SBAC, which is the new test that they're going to be taking. And we'll talk about that, but that's perfect. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to move on. Yeah, there are high quality academic standards in math and ELA, English Language Arts, also in science and social studies. And pretty soon we have them do also in English language development. So standards are coming out. They outline what your children should know and be able to do at the end of each grade. And you're going to take a moment to look at the standards, and you're going to find a pattern with the standards. Every year is going to be so critical for your children. And we're going to take a peek at the standards, and you're going to see what that means. One of the most significant reforms in U.S. education that I can remember, where we always talked about why can't we nationalize the standards? Well, we have. Whatever they teach in New York, we're teaching here. Whatever they teach in other states. So now anybody who's using 43 states that are using Common Core, now we can do some comparisons and see what's going on with that. And the standards were drafted by experts and designed to ensure that your students are prepared for today's entry-level career, college courses, and workforce training programs. So really preparing them for that, really getting them to have the rigor in the classroom. We'll talk about what that means. Really getting them to speak and to cite evidence. So I'll explain all of that. And so far, 43 states have committed to joining the Common Core State Commission. So today, like Mr. Martinez says, we will look at English language arts. The ELA standards, they're rigorous, grade level expectations in the areas of reading, writing, listening, and speaking, those 4 areas. So let's take a peek at the Common Core ELA handout that I gave you. It looks like this. So we're going to look at the standards, and this is what the teachers use to plan lessons. This is what they look at first before they actually start designing the lesson. If you look here, we start with kindergarten, right? And then we have first grade. And these are ELA standards for K through 5. So we have kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and they go on all the way to 5th grade. So you have your standards. So I'm hopefully covering everyone's children K through 5. This is what your teachers are actually using to plan the lesson. This is where I want you to focus. I want you to look here at reading literature. Now I want you to look at this little rectangle here. Then I want you to flip the page. Go to first grade. I want you to look at this section here. And then go on to second grade. And keep going till you get to 5th grade. And I want you to see if you can identify a pattern that is happening with the standards there. So just take a moment to look at those 5 sections, see if you see a pattern. As you think you see something, there's a pattern, go ahead and share with your elbow partner and tell your elbow partner, what do you see? What are you seeing there? So there's a moment to talk. Okay, we see a pattern? Okay, I'll I'll take a quiet hand. Who can share? What are some things you see there with the standards? Just that first section standard, which is reading literature.
It's always about ask and answer, and then it just elaborates from there, goes a bit deeper. It's great.
Exactly. So it goes a lot. So the
Goes more in depth.
terminology changes, right?
Mhm.
So let's very good. So let's look at that. So our first for kindergarten, it says with prompting and support, right? With prompting and support. So if you look at first grade, the prompting and support, is it there? It's gone. Now the students need to ask and answer questions about key details in the text. Right, so we're not prompting and supporting anymore. So let's look at second grade. Now we add a little more to the standard, right? So now it says ask and answer such questions as who, what, where, when, and why, and how. Right? Was that true for first grade? No, right? So if we look at third grade, ask and answer questions to demonstrate understanding of a text. So now they have to show us that they're understanding, they're comprehending what they're reading. And referring explicitly to the text. This is where they're going to cite the evidence, where the teacher might ask the question, what occurred at school at Carpenter. Well, on page 3, it says that this is what occurred, and they actually cite the quote. So they start doing that by third grade. So do you see the progression? There's a progression with the standards, and that's what's different from today's standards to Common Core. And that's true for every section. We're not going to go through every section. You can take that home, whether it's true in math or ELA. There's always a progression in every section, whether it's reading, listening, speaking, or writing. You're gonna see that progression. Is that clear? All right. So I just wanted to share that, and this is what your teachers, your children's teachers, use to plan. So when we look at with prompting and support, answer questions about key details in the text, they really have to analyze this standard. What does it mean? What do the students have to do? And then they start looking at how are we going to assess the students, and then they plan. They plan a lesson. In the years past, they used to plan, right? And let's see, hopefully, which standard it's going to hit. I think it's going to hit this standard or this standard. Now it's thinking with the end in mind. They're looking at the standard. How are we going to assess and monitor? And what are we going to use to plan? What does it look like? Is that clear? Any questions about the Common Core standards, ELA? So the one thing to know is there is a progression. The standards progress, whether it's reading, listening, speaking, or writing, and that's also true for math. Questions? Okay. So those are the standards. All right. So the shifts. Here are the shifts, and again, I'm gonna go over the shifts. You have that in writing, so if you don't have, if you want to write, you can write it, but these are some of the shifts that are outlined with the Common Core. Shift number 1, there's a need for a balance with informational and literary text. In years past, teachers would use a lot of literature with your children. You'd read literature, and there was an imbalance. Now what Common Core is asking is a 50-50 percentage in each class, in elementary, for informational text and also literature. We want to keep both of them. So when you think of Common Core, also I want you to keep in mind nonfiction, informational text. They want your children to look at science. They want your children to look at books that are going to really teach them of what's going on around the world, to learn about India, to learn about Korea, to not just learn about the Three Little Pigs, right? To really know about the world around them. So that's a big shift there. And along with shift number 2, knowledge in the disciplines, which includes science, social studies, right? We do have standards for social studies. When you think of staircase of complexity, we're gonna demonstrate that next week. You're gonna hear a lot about close reading, and what does that look like? Close reading is basically 3 simple steps. Kids are gonna read for the flow. Then they're going to annotate the book. In kindergarten, obviously, the teacher's going to read the text to them. First grade, some first graders are probably ready to read. So it's the flow, annotate, and then the last step would be asking text-dependent questions. So you really want the students to delve, someone to delve into the text and really get to know and understand it. So a lot of close reading, which is aligned with shift number 4, text-based answers. So we want our students to cite evidence. Go back to the text and tell us where it says that. I go to many classrooms here and other schools, and it's amazing what the children are doing with this information. Where they're actually citing, and they would say, well, on page 4 it says that, and they quote, and that's the evidence. And that's what we want your children to do. And they're doing it here as well.
Yes,
It's
my
great to
third
see.
grader, they have to put the page number next to their answer.
That's right.
As a reference.
Right, right. So they're citing the evidence. They're not just saying, well, I think it says on page 75 that, and then they quote it, okay? Writing from sources. So not only do we want them to cite the evidence, but we also, what we all would do when we went to college, is we were actually extracting information from books and using them to write. So they're using that information to write. So writing from sources. And academic vocabulary, that's a big one there. That's a big one. So we want them to learn new vocabulary every day. Learn a word every day. What does it mean? And so a lot of that has to do with going back to informational text, because that's where you'll have a lot of high academic vocabulary. So shift number 1, we're going to go back informational versus literary text. So basically, there was an emphasis on literature, right? How many remember this? Brown Bear, right? Great books. I read all of these books for my children. Kim's First Full Moon, right? Great literature. We're not saying get rid of this. We need this. It's important. But when we think of informational text, we want to teach them about the life cycle, right? The Constitution. Once your children start getting into 7th grade, this is actually 7th grade material. Solar energy, right? Albert Einstein. So when you think of informational text, these are some examples that we want your children to start reading. And it's happening here, and it's happening in other schools. So that's one of the things there. So some of the things that you can do is supply more informational text to your children to read at home. Because they're doing it here, and just emphasize it at home, which you're probably already doing it. Read aloud with your child informational text, and just have fun reading with them. When they see you read, it's going to motivate them to read as well. Shift number 2, learn about the world, about the world, in all these books. India. Supply series of texts on topics of interest for your children. Find books that explain a lot of informational text. Nonfiction, discuss nonfiction text with your students. So that's how they're going to get smarter. It's really learning that vocabulary in that text, citing that evidence from that text, which is the big shift that is occurring. So I'll just let you read that. I'm not going to read that to you. So these are some facts that were quoted by some professors. Lessons really dropping out. We drop out. Okay. We really want to make sure that children are reading text and that text is developed until that moment. Questions about this? Moving on. Shift number 3, complex material. Read material at a comfort level. And then also, you want to challenge your students at as well. Not to the point where they're going to get overly frustrated, but you do want to challenge your children as well. With that goes with the staircase of complexity. They might be at a 3rd grade reading level, but maybe go to 3rd grade, 3.4 months, 3.5 months, a little higher than what they are. You really want to challenge them. Handle frustration and keep pushing. You kind of want to, in Japan, this is what they teach, especially the math. They pose a problem, the students grapple with it, they get frustrated a little, then they kind of figure it out. A little bit of frustration is good, but not to the point where it's overloaded. What you can do is provide more challenging text, and provide text that they want to read as well. Make it appropriate, but challenge them just a little. If they're 4th grade, you don't want to give them 8th grade material. I think that's pretty obvious. Read challenging stuff with them. Show that challenging stuff is worth unpacking. And what that means is, they might read a paragraph, and they're not sure what that paragraph means. Right, but go ahead and ask them those probing questions to see if they can kind of figure it out without giving them the answer. So really unpack that paragraph. A lot has to do with close reading which I'll demonstrate to you next week with a kindergarten lesson and what that looks like. Okay, shift 3, discuss reading using evidence. Again, it's really citing the text, going back to the text. So if you're reading with your child, it's okay to say, well, can you show me where's the evidence? Show me that in the book. We really want the students to really go back to the text, cite it. I've seen kindergarten do it. Kindergartners are doing it. The days of finger painting, remember that? Some schools are probably still doing that, but kindergarten, first grade, second grade, they're actually citing text, or they're actually using, teacher makes posters and they're actually doing this. Writing from sources, some things that you can do, encourage writing at home, thank you letters. Maybe they read something, kind of have your children summarize or some main ideas about what they read. So really not only at school, but really emphasize that writing at home. The shift number 5, academic vocabulary. Listen, one way to increase your children's vocabulary is through reading. They gotta read. So if you're providing that information at home, you're emphasizing, you're reinforcing what's occurring here at school. So making sure that we have books at home, and that's how they're gonna learn that academic vocabulary. You have all of this. I provided all of it in your folders, so do not feel overwhelmed. Just take it home, read through it, and I am available. So come ask me questions. That's what I'm here for. I'm also your resource to provide you with information. So we looked at the Common Core ELA standards, right? And you saw the progression, right, of each grade level. Teachers use that. That's one tool that they use. These shifts are aligned with the Common Core. Right? You mentioned the depth and how we want really our students to cite the evidence and explain and justify, all in line with our shifts. Okay? Now, so far so good? Okay. Now this is something, when you hear depth of knowledge, this is what teachers use. This is a guide that they use to think about what types of questions am I going to ask in the classroom. How deep do students need to know the content in order to be successful? This part here is very, very important because this is aligned with the test that your children are being taken. It's called the S factor. We're going to talk about that towards the end. But now, depth of knowledge is really looking at levels. You're going to look at 4 levels. And you have this, I'm going to take baby steps here, but you have this information. It's all spelled out for you. It's in the handout. It's yellow, and I think it's lavender, or is that purple? Right? So if you can take that out, Anyone has a packet? So the intent is to help design lessons that will help students have access to rigorous curriculum. That's basically what we want. So if you look at level 1, we're looking at recall, reproduction, it's memorizing, it's recalling facts. Very low level stuff, but necessary in the classroom. We need that. Okay? 2 times 2, 4, 5 times 2, facts. You remember it. Going back to the book, it says here. So it's very low level, but we need that as well. Okay? Level 2, these are skills. You're organizing information. You're looking at cause and effect. The difference between 1 and 2 is in level 2, they're applying the information. Maybe they're classifying information in the classroom. It's still a low level with a little bit of complexity, but level 1 and 2 are low. DOK 3, this is actually, again, what teachers use to plan lessons. This is strategic thinking. Now the students are coming up with a plan. They might put together a model to see what something looks like. Okay, so now when you get to depth of knowledge 3, that's where you start to get the rigor in the classroom. When you see depth of knowledge 4, that's extended thinking. That's going above and beyond. They're writing a research paper. And when you think of depth of knowledge 4, think of multiple sources. The students are using multiple sources, multiple texts, writing a research paper, and they're putting it together. They're synthesizing and putting it together. So every step is important. This is what your teachers are using to plan lessons. Now, questions about this? It's a guide that teachers are using to really plan the lessons. How deep do we want to go into this lesson? How deeply do the students need to know the content in order to be successful with it? Is the goal just for the students to memorize facts, or we're just going to go to DOK 1? Do I want them to look at cause and effect? Well, we're gonna go to DOK 1, but also move to DOK 2, right? If it's strategic thinking, where they have to really put something together and say a model, well, they have to get to DOK 1, 2, and 3, right? You need all 1, 2, 3 steps to get to step 4 in order to write that research paper. Is that clear on, okay. Usually with 1 and 2, there's a right answer. There's a right answer, right? With 3 and 4, students are taking multiple pathways to solve a math problem, right? They're getting the same answer. Or in a debate, they're debating and they're talking about an opinion. So there's a lot of rigor involved. So when you think of 1 and 2, you're thinking about the low level. 3 and 4, that's a little higher level thinking. Okay. Now, why is depth of knowledge important? And this is where I really want to share this information with you. Remember the CST? Which levels do you think the CST concentrated on? See the square? 1 and 2. 1 and 2. And that was it. 1 and 2. So we looked at facts. We looked at reading something. The answer's right there, right? And maybe they had to look at cause and effect relationships, right? They still need to do that in the new test. In the new test, the SBAC, which is called a Smarter Balanced Assessment, there's still going to be DOK 1 questions. You're still going to have DOK 2 questions, but there's going to be a focus on 3 and 4. Okay, I'm going to say that again. There's going to be a focus now on DOK 3 and 4. So now you're going to have those higher level questions. Students are going to have to, sometimes they're going to watch a video during that test. They're going to have to cite evidence from that video and actually write about it. So this is why it's very important for you to know this information. When you think of depth of knowledge, it's a roadmap. It's really a roadmap. And teachers are going to say, okay, I might start here in this corner, right? But my goal is to get up here. So these are the steps that I need to take in order for my students to be successful with content. So what's the road that I'm taking for my students to take? So think of a roadmap when you think of DOK. All right, so far so good? Are we good with DOK? And again, you have it there so you can go home and kind of read it again. Teachers would also use something called Bloom's. How many of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy? The Bloom's taxonomy is, when you think of Bloom's, it's a type of thinking. We want our students to understand. We want them to apply information. We want them to evaluate, and we want them to create. So those are types of thinking. We're still using that to plan lessons. But in addition to using Bloom's, we're using depth of knowledge. What is depth of knowledge? So it's basically, how deep do we want our students to know the information, to really understand the content, successfully interact with it? So what we're doing is we're meshing the two. We have Bloom's, type of thinking, and now we have DOK, how deep do students need to know the type? Is that clear? So we're putting the two together. So when you hear Bloom's, what kind of thinking are the students going to be doing? Are they going to understand? Are they going to evaluate? Are they going to analyze? Are they going to create? And what does that roadmap look like? So basically, we're putting it together. It looks like this. This is the rigor matrix where you have the sheet in your binder. Here you have Bloom's. These are your types of thinking. And then here you have DOK 1, DOK 2, 3, and 4. So if you want your students to apply, our goal is to really look at DOK 1, this is what they're going to do. If they want to get to this point, well, they're going to apply DOK 1, DOK 2, DOK 3. So this is kind of what we're looking at. So I want you to take that sheet out, if you would, please. It looks like this. This one here. And look towards the right upper corner. Make sure it says ELA, because that's what we're going to be looking at. And just take a couple of minutes, just study it a bit. Look at Bloom's. look at the types of thinking, and just kind of look at the different levels and some examples of what your children have to do in order to understand content with web step technology. So I'll give you a couple minutes for that. And if you like, you can share some of your findings, some questions you might have with your elbow partner, or some aha moments, or if you're confused about something, so you can talk to your elbow partner about what you see as well. So what do you notice as you go across the levels? As you're going across the level, what are you noticing? Does the level of complexity increase or decrease? Increase, good. So that's what we want you to see, is the level of complexity increases. So this is what our teachers are using. Okay, what type of level of complexity do you want your children to learn today? And what type of thinking are they're gonna do in the class? Is that clear on this here? Okay, so I know this is a lot of information. I know because when I gave it to teachers, it took them a couple of days to kind of figure it out. So I'm keeping that in mind, right? I know this is pretty dense, but this is information from you, right? Now when you go to that conference with your teachers, when they talk about maybe depth of knowledge, you kind of have an idea, right? You can talk about the types of levels, or what kind of questions are you asking in the classroom. I know Mr. Creel talked about DOK, depth of knowledge. Are you using that in the classroom? And can you tell me more about the type of rigor that is happening in the class? And tell me more about our children citing evidence. So really, it's kind of empowering you as well. Okay. So this is a tool that the teachers are using as well. What is the left side called? What do we call this side? Bloom taxonomy, and that's types of thinking, right? And then on this side, what is it called? Depth of knowledge, right? Where you got DOK 1, DOK 2, DOK 3, DOK 4. All right. So let's watch a video on how a teacher uses depth of knowledge. We're going to look at an example, and then kind of like everything that you've just been talking about, you'll see it on this video.
The Common Core Learning Standards expect students to perform more cognitively demanding tasks. But how do you know that the tasks students complete meet these rigorous standards? Webb's Depth of Knowledge, or DOK, is one way to measure the cognitive demands of tasks. By using 4 DOK levels that build in complexity, cognitive rigor looks at the DOK as well as the type of thinking required for students to interact with and respond to content. DOK 1 elicits recall and reproduction. DOK 2 focuses on skills, concepts, and basic reasoning. DOK 3 expects strategic thinking and complex reasoning. And DOK 4 requires extended thinking. Depth of knowledge, which is integrated with the revised Bloom's taxonomy in the Hess Cognitive Rigor Matrix, is an important tool as schools begin to increase the rigor of curriculum maps, assessments, and instructional practices to align to the Common Core. Rigorous instructional materials should include a mixture of tasks from across DOK levels. In order to better understand increasing cognitive complexity, let's look at the succession of a social studies task from a DOK 1 to a DOK 4 using the same text. The text we'll be using is the Gettysburg Address.
7 years ago.
The Common Core Learning Standards for Literacy place the Gettysburg Address as a 9th to 10th grade text, so we will focus on aligning tasks to the requirements for this grade band. The following tasks align to the Common Core Reading Informational Text Standards 1, 2, and 6 for these grades. A sample DOK Level 1 task for this text is, what date is Lincoln referring to as 7 years ago? Although this task has a couple of steps, it is DOK 1 because it asks students to identify a footnote explaining that score equals 20 and then do a simple math word problem to calculate that the reference date is 1776. A DOK 2 question that builds off the previous task is, what is the connection between the date 7 years ago and the argument Lincoln is trying to make? This question is a DOK 2 because it asks students to identify the central idea and explain a relationship. The task asks students to determine the significance of the date mentioned. Then, they must explain how this relates to Lincoln's main argument for preserving a nation formed on principles of freedom and equality. As we move on to DOK Level 3 and 4 tasks, we notice that instead of one right answer, there are opportunities for multiple correct answers, with justification and an explanation of reasoning. A DOK Level 3 task for the Gettysburg Address might say, Lincoln's address lays out a thesis and argument in support of equality. Analyze his line of reasoning and the evidence he uses to advance his point of view. This is a DOK 3 task because it asks students to analyze the use of rhetoric as Lincoln relates the basis of equality during the founding of the United States to the fight to end slavery in the battles of the Civil War. A DOK Level 4 task requires extended thinking and in-depth analysis, most often seen in longer-term projects. For example, with this text, a student might be asked to draw from additional related sources, to write a research paper that discusses the role war plays in nation building. This task would require students to refine and deepen their understanding of nation, as presented in Lincoln's speech, and examine how conflict can shape and reshape national borders. It would also require students to analyze and synthesize information from various sources. This task succession focuses on social studies examples, but the basic principles apply across disciplines. You can find more information about DOK and examples from different subject areas in the Common Core Library.
Any thoughts on that video? To kind of get an idea of what DOK 1, DOK 2, this is a middle school, so I just gave you an idea. We're going to go over an elementary 4th grade lesson that you can see, and I'm going to walk you through it. But that's middle school. It's happening in middle school, it's happening in high school, so everyone is familiar with DOK, whether it's elementary, middle, or high. So we just have to empower the parents to really know what that means and what we're using in the classroom. Any comments on the video? To kind of help you?
Is it up to the teacher how far they take it from 1 to 4? Does each grade have to go 1 through 4?
Very good question. It's up to the teacher, and it's up to the levels you have in the classroom. So one teacher may start with the type of thinking could be understanding, and another teacher can start with a type of thinking in a different class with analyzing, right? Remember the roadmap we talked about? They can take a different road, different path, but the end result could be the same. It all depends on the levels in the classroom. It's a very good question.
When you say the levels, you mean like the differentiation of?
Yeah, the levels, we might have a gifted cluster in the classroom, right? In other schools, we might have a class of English language learners, where maybe you might want to go to DOK 1, 2, and maybe 3, but it all depends on the classroom and the makeup of it. Good question. Okay. So now that we looked at a middle school, this is a fourth grade lesson. So if we look at DOK 1, look at the word describe. DOK 2, describe. And DOK 3, describe. Okay, they are using the verb describe, but just because they're describing, what follows is going to determine the type of rigor or complexity in whether it's a 1, 2, or 3. So we're looking at describe. In DOK 1, an example of a science is they're going to describe 3 characteristics of metamorphic rocks. It's really a DOK 1 because it's low level, they have to refer to the text, and it's right there. Okay, so it's describing, looking at facts, looking at details, so that's a 1. Still using describe, describe the difference between metamorphic and igneous rocks. So now we're looking at 2, right? We're looking at 2. And now we're looking at relationships, so that would be a DOK 2. Specify, explain, show relationships. So it's a little higher, but it's still on the low end, right? Wherever we talked about 1 and 2, that would be low. And now describe, we're still using the verb describe, but now they're going to describe a model that you might use to represent the relationships that exist within the rock. So it's a little higher level now. They have to put together a model that they're going to use to describe now the relationships that exist in a rock. So that moves on to a level 3. How can we perhaps make this into a level 4? What are the key words that I use to keep in mind to make this lesson into a level 4? Remember what I said?
To add different sources.
Kiss your brain. That's perfect. Multiple sources, multiple texts. It's really taking maybe a metamorphic rock, igneous rock, and now you're describing it, but you're extracting multiple sources to really show the difference between the two. So multiple sources, multiple texts. Perfect. Okay, so is that clear here? This is a 4th grade science lesson. Very good. Okay, so now let's put this to practice. Let's see what you know. So identify, is this English language arts depth of knowledge, low cognitive demand, is this a 1 or a 2? They have to identify and summarize the problem, solution, major events, and complex in a literary text. What do you think that is? You can use your matrix to see. You can show me with your fingers. You can go like this or like this. Okay, I heard 2. Let's see if you're correct. Gifted group right here. It is a 2. We have a gifted group. That's right. All right. Let's look at another one here. Now we're looking at a high cognitive demand. Analyze or evaluate the effectiveness of literary elements such as plot, setting, conflict, and point of view by providing evidence from the text.
3.
And why is it 3?
But there is no,
Yes. Yes. This is the gifted cluster right now. This is the DOK 3. Because they're analyzing, they're interpreting the author's craft to create or critique a text. Perfect. All right, so question that was brought up somewhere over here, where teacher A might start here with understanding, right? And this is the path that they're going to take with their students. And they're going to come down here, but the end result will be to evaluate. Teacher B will start with applying, right? DOK 1, DOK 2. Now I might come here to analyze DOK 2, and then still analyzing, go on to DOK 3, but the end result will be the same. Different roadmaps, take different pathways, but the end result could be the same. Depends on on the teacher's class. Okay? You ready for an activity? This is where you're going to move around a little. So we're going to work in teams. So if you see, you have cards at DOK level 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 cards, and you can work as a team. You can work together as a team here, work together as a team here. Now, let's have 2 teams here. This will be 1 team. This will be 2 teams. And what I would like you to do is look using your matrix, right? Using your matrix, you're going to look at which card is a DOK 1, which one is a DOK 2, DOK 3, DOK 4, and then once you think that's a DOK 1, I want you to attach it to our DOK 1 poster. Then the card that you think is a DOK 2 demand, and then DOK 3 is here, these DOK 4. So go ahead and have those conversations, use your matrix, and I want to see if we can, just checking for understanding here.
Pause.